Those who grow up in dysfunctional homes are 4 times more likely to be in relationships with those who are dysfunctional. And a lot of times when we hear that, we instantly think of romantic relationships.
Yep.
But I could see that in my own life. It was with authority figures, it was with mentors, it was with churches, it was with in friendships. And so what I was seeing was these relationships were kind of like rupturing, they weren't working out. And I think when we see something, a lot of times we can cast blame, right? Like we cast blame
Yep.
or we hide. But when we see something happen kind of over and over and over again in our lives, I think it's important to stop and just take inventory. Like, why is this happening and what part may I actually have in this? And when we do that, we often can see that we very well may have some patterns in our lives that are leading us to dysfunction. And like I said, they tend to be very subtle.
Well, hey crew, it's Adam. You're listening to The Conversation, and I am so honored that you are. I hope it's been a fantastic February so far. If you are anything like me, you are counting down the days to spring. I cannot wait for warm weather. But today, though, it is episode 284, and in our conversation, we're talking about how to break through the unhealthy patterns in our lives, something that every single one of us needs to wrestle with, needs to talk about, needs to look at and evaluate in our lives. Before we get to that conversation though, I need, and more than that, I want to give a huge shout out to our partners. Each week, these partners help make the conversations possible. They're also businesses and organizations that I personally know and trust very, very well. And that's why I want you to know about them also. Today though, our first partner is Vern Eide Motorcars. Vern Eide Mitsubishi is a growing employee-owned company that strives to deliver dreams and transform lives. And Vern Eide's goal is excellence in everything that they do. And friends, I'm to the point now where if I hear someone saying, hey, we're looking at a new vehicle or I'm looking for a new truck, even if I'm looking for a boat, when I hear that, I just say, hey, don't go anywhere else. Go and check out Vern Eide. Whether you're looking for an Outlander like I personally drive, whether it's an Acura, Ford, Chevy, GMC, or Honda, no matter the make or vehicle you're looking for, even if you're looking for a tractor or a snowmobile, Vern Eide will most likely have it. And no matter where you live, Vern Eide will ship it to you. Go check out verneide.com. Again, that's verneide.com. Our second partner is an amazing organization called Mission Haiti. And Mission Haiti is a nonprofit that I've personally known and supported for over a decade, okay? 2 months ago, actually 3-4 months ago, I was able to go to Haiti for my 4th time. And this was my favorite trip by far. I was just once again blown away by the work that Mission Haiti is doing every single day. Their goal is to love Jesus, love others, and make disciples in the country of Haiti. And one of their biggest ministries is their student education program, where they provide a Christian education along with a warm meal for over 2,800 kids. My wife and I, we've sponsored a little lady for the last few years, and on this last trip I was on, I got to meet her personally, and I was just like overwhelmed by the joy I felt that I got to be a tiny part of her life. And so I am begging you, not just for these kids who desperately need an education to hear about Jesus and a warm meal, but also, and more importantly, for you. There's so much joy in sponsoring a child, and so go please visit mission-haiti.org. Again, that's mission-haiti.org and sponsor a child today, okay? Well, for today's conversation, I sat down with Tori Hope Petersen. And Tori, she is an author, she's a speaker, she's an advocate for foster care. More than anything though, I was struck by Tori's kindness, by her wisdom, and her vulnerability. And Tori, she starts by talking about some of the hardships in foster parenting. She's been a foster kid herself, and now she's a foster parent. One of the hardest challenges is saying goodbye to foster kids when they transition from their home. And so she shares about that, but the heart of our conversation is around breaking unhealthy patterns in our lives. And Tori, she shares so honestly about what that's looked like in her life, and she shares some practical tools that all of us can break through the unhealthy patterns in our lives lives. And so on that note, as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation. Okay, so Tori, we typically hear a person's highlight reel. Are you willing to share a current unpretty part of your life? It could be stress, it could be grief, it could be something big, something small. Is there a current unpretty part of your life?
Wow, I love that you start there, because usually people are like, what are your accomplishments? So you just jump out and we are going to get real really
We go
fast.
to the deep end right away.
We sure do. And yeah, I'm going to be honest, and I would say that grief, my husband and I are foster parents. And yesterday I shut a bedroom door because I cannot muster up the strength to clean the room out, but I also can't muster up the strength to look at it. That's what grief looks like.
Whoa. Yeah, and that's legit. Can I ask how long the child was with you?
Yeah, not even that long. It was like 3 months. But I think when you're doing it and when you do it, your heart's in it. It's hard sometimes, no matter how long they're there. And in the foster care world, there's like the plan for the child can be adoption, but then it can flip like a switch, or the plan for the child can be to go home, but it can switch in a second. And so that's just what the situation was. It was sad and hard.
Well, I honestly, it would have been okay if you would have said this too. I thought you were going to say 3 days. 3 months actually for me feels like a long time. Well,
the wild thing is there are some foster parents who, they're fostering a child for 3 years and they're told this is your child, you're going to be able to adopt them. And then a family member comes, the day before the adoption day, and they lose a child. And so I just know that our situation in comparison to what some of my dear friends have went through time-wise and heart-wise maybe isn't as heart-wrenching, but I was just so literally last night, the door was open and I couldn't even, I was like, we're just going to shut that door. We're just avoiding that pain right now because we have to launch a book and we have to do all these other things, but there will be a time where I actually have to grieve for real.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I ask how many foster kids you've had?
Yeah, my husband and I have had 6 placements and 11 foster children. So placements are when the child or children are placed with you. And through those 6, we've fostered 11 children. We have a 16-year-old foster daughter, and she has been with us. I mean, we're going on 2 years with her. We adore her and love her, and she will probably be with us until she decides not to be with us, when she ages out, when she becomes an adult and wants to do adult things and be on her own. And then I have a 6 and 4-year-old biological children.
Whoa. Thanks for sharing that. Foster parent, does it get any harder or easier when a child transitions out of your home? A challenge to anybody who's not fostering that maybe should? I'm not sure if that's the right word. Those 2 questions.
James 1:27, it says pure and faultless religion is to care for the orphan and the widow. And Jesus says many times that we are meant to care for the vulnerable. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Being a foster parent is probably the most needed. Children need good homes, and it's hard to find good families for children at the end of the day. And caseworkers are so overloaded trying to find good homes. So if that's something that God's calling you to, I would absolutely encourage you to do it. But there's also a lot of different ways. Being a mentor or foster families, 50% of foster families quit fostering after the first year. And typically, if you ask them why, it's because they don't feel supported. So if there's a foster family in your church or in your community, ask them if you can bring them a meal once a week. Ask them how you can support them, love them, maybe clean their kitchen once a week. Things like that are really encouraging to foster families.
Yeah, no, thanks for I've never heard that stat either. Like the year, that's quite a stat. And I will just say it really, really strongly. Specifically if you're passionate about life, Gosh, what a shame and what a challenge to the church. What a testimony would it be if there was no foster children waiting because the church was just the church. And, I'll just, a lot of times we're quick to fly flags and put yard signs out. What a testimony would it be if there was no children that were waiting. I love hearing just your passion on fostering. Adoption is the song my wife and I sing. We have an Ethiopian in our house, my sister, South Korean. But honestly, even hearing you speak about fostering is challenging. Yours truly here. So, Tori, would you be willing to share the Cliff Note version? And you're like, no, I cannot share a Cliff Notes version of my story. But if you would be willing to attempt the Cliff Notes version of who you are for the person who's new to you.
Yes. People typically know me for sharing my experience of growing up in foster care. So we kind of started backwards. Usually we started with me being a foster parent, but I am a foster parent because I have known the foster care system very intimately since I was 4 years old. I first went into the foster care system when I was 4, was reunited with my biological mom. My biological mom did the absolute, until the day that I died, my mom did the absolute best with what she had. She loved me so much. And she treasured me, truly. But her mental health was, she was a child with a lot of trauma at one point, and it didn't heal. She didn't have the resources to heal it. The community, she didn't ever come to Christ. She didn't have the things that I have gotten to have. And so I went to the foster care system again when I was 12 years old.
Whoa.
Moved throughout 12 different homes, which was very difficult. Felt very unloved, unwanted, disposable. It was a very challenging time. I aged out the day I turned 18. My track coach ended up taking me in, and he is who I call dad. He's who my kids call grandpa. And yeah, came to faith through all of these things. The Cliff Note version is hard, but that is the Cliff Note version. Really came to faith because I really, really wanted a dad. And I was really mad at God. I was like, why, if God loved me so much, why didn't he give me a dad? That would have solved a lot of my problems. I wouldn't have went to foster care. I would have had someone to protect me from the abuse. And then I was at church one Sunday. My foster mom had a faithful foster mom, kept dragging me to church every Sunday. I was singing the song Good, Good Father, and it just clicked, like clarity. I was like, oh, I do have a father. I have a father who has loved me, protected me, held me throughout foster care. And when I felt like I kind of let go, that I just open hands, Lord, you are enough for me.
Yeah.
And then when I did that, when I accepted Christ into my life, and when I accepted God as father and me as his daughter, then God gave me an earthly father through my track coach. And I've seen that pattern in my life over and over again. Like when I'm willing to let go, when I'm willing to open my hands and say, God, you are enough, God gives to me what I always wanted, like above and beyond abundantly what I imagined.
Well, that was very impressive, sharing all of that in that amount of time. That was legitimately the Cliff Notes version. And your track coach, how insanely awesome is that?
Yeah, he's awesome. He's the best.
That's amazing. I also need to give a shout out. You have a Sioux Falls, South Dakota connection, which very few human beings do. There's not many people in South Dakota. And that's a stereotype, but partly true. Okay, partly true. But your husband, Jacob, lived in Sioux Falls for a time. And when he did, so this would be your father-in-law, James Petersen, who was a pastor in Sioux Falls for years, got to cross paths with him. Before they moved away from Sioux Falls, they attended the church that I pastored. I was 24 when I started Embrace. And that was at our first location that they attended. So your father-in-law, this says a lot about his humility, attended a church with a pastor that was probably 26 years old. I wouldn't let my 26-year-old version of me borrow the keys to my Jeep that has 100,000 miles.
For context, did we say that he was a veteran pastor? Did
yes.
you say that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Like longtime seasoned pastor who was attending the church of this Yahoo. Like that just sends a lot about him just having a heart of humility. I said this though, we grabbed lunch. I know exactly where we grabbed lunch. It was that profound. And he spoke some words into me as a pastor, and I did not see it coming. And so there at that restaurant, which I know exactly where we were, I had a good cry fest in front of your father-in-law because he ministered to me in a way. So shout out Pastor James Petersen for the impact. So I just needed to highlight and honor him just in that way, because it was something I'll never forget. Okay, so you got I'm
now going to tell him that he has to listen to this podcast.
Oh, anytime his name gets brought up, because it does get brought up, because of the impact that he had when he was here. I always can't speak well enough of him. So it was a very, very big moment for me that really shifted. And it's something that I've continued to think about even literally last week, not preparing for this interview, but I thought about last week. I was like, his words, they're still true. What he said, what he's spoken in my life is still true. Okay, so you got a brand new book coming out, Breaking the Patterns That Break You. If you're listening to this after February 4th, it is out. So go get yourself a copy. If you're willing to share, what were some of the patterns that were causing some havoc in your own life, and what were they? What did they look like? I'll just let you go.
Yeah. So in junior high, I had a teacher, and he had us read this book called The 7 Habits of a Highly Effective Teenager, spinoff of the book, the popular one, 7 Habits of an Adult, or you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
And so
I love it.
We were reading this
7
book,
Habits of Adulting. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever that book is. But the teen version, okay? And so we were reading it, and the first rule was begin with the end in mind. Of course, I'm like in junior high, like, what does that even mean? And so he was like, you guys really need to start. He was speaking to the whole class. He said, you guys really need to start just taking life seriously, because if you don't, some of you are going to end up like your parents. And it just I was like, whoa, it just kind of struck me. And I imagined myself, I knew from a young age that I wanted to be a mom. And I imagined myself with my kids living this life that reflected mine. When I was a kid, there were drugs on the table, unsafe people coming in and out. There was a lot of abuse in my home. And then I pictured me as a mom being able to provide for my children and nurture my children and having toys on the table, not drugs. But I knew in that moment that it was going to take choices to get there. And so that was really this moment where I was like, okay, I want to break generational cycles. I want change for my own family when I'm a mom. And while I've been able to do that, like there's not abuse in my home is safe. My children have not went into foster care. There are many cycles that are repeated for foster youth, for children who grow up in foster care. And it's just statistics. It's not even stereotypes. It's just what the statistics say, what the research says. And it's really sad. And even though I broke those statistics, what was still happening in my life was that I had a lot of really dysfunctional thought patterns that were things that were spoken over me when I was a kid, whether it was with my family of origin or whether it was in the foster care system. And when we have thoughts, when we have beliefs, they affect the way that we live. They affect the way that we behave. And so I would have these thoughts. And I think coming to faith, I think almost I wanted there to be clarity, but it almost felt like I used the truth of God to kind of like hold on to the lies. And so, there was a lot of self-hatred, and I would call that humility. And I think there's a lot of Christians who do that, right? We say that our self-hatred is humility. And so that was probably the foundational lie that I had to break to kind of face all of the other lies. And that was the lie that I just wasn't lovable and I wasn't loved. God loved me, maybe, but probably not. And I just couldn't believe that I was loved. And I know that came from the things that were spoken over me and the patterns of being thrown out from home to home to home. And so I looked back at Genesis 1 when God made everything that he did, and he said he called it good. And I could not believe, I think it was really hard for me to believe that I was good, that I had any reason to love who God created me to be. But I started to speak this truth over myself, and that's like God did a good job making me. And to some people, they're like, "Whoa, that's kind of haughty." Like, "Whoa, that's kind of bold, prideful." But like, it's not even about me. It's literally about God's creation. I am God's creation. You are God's creation, and God did a good job making us, and we can embrace that truth. And what that allows us to do is it doesn't allow us to just embrace like this selfish kind of love, but it allows us to embrace ourselves as God who has created us to be, to love who God has created us to be.
That's so good. I thought it was powerful how you differentiated like, hey, I don't have drugs at my house now. I have toys. I don't whatever, but that pattern can still be there. Like it's like we have we're not exactly what we've come from, but there's still that residue maybe. What would you say, Tori? Like, so what patterns are unhealthy inside of me? I don't see any unhealthy patterns inside of me. What are you talking about? And maybe it's like, who are you? Like, kind of keep people at arm's length anytime they try to. What would you say to kind of maybe begin to see some of your own self-destructive patterns?
Yeah, that's a great question because what I have learned is that patterns are very subtle. They're typically very quiet and sneaky, and they're what we've always known, right? Like we're living in patterns because it's what we're used to. So there's a psychological research that, and I love the Lord with all my heart, but I really believe that when we acknowledge psychology, we're just acknowledging something that God created. I think we can be skeptical of it, but also at the same time, I think that there's a lot of good in it. So there is this psychological research that says those who grow up in dysfunctional homes are 4 times more likely to be in relationships with those who are dysfunctional. And a lot of times when we hear that, we instantly think of romantic relationships.
Yep.
But I could see that in my own life. It was with authority figures, it was with mentors, it was with churches, it was with in friendships. And so what I was seeing was these relationships were kind of like rupturing, they weren't working out. And I think when we see something, a lot of times we can cast blame, right? Like we cast blame
Yep.
or we hide. But when we see something happen kind of over and over and over again in our lives, I think it's important to stop and just take inventory. Like, why is this happening? And what part may I actually have in this? And when we do that, we often can see that we very well may have some patterns in our lives that are leading us to dysfunction. And like I said, they tend to be very subtle. We tend to be used to these patterns. For me, I was like, I knew I wanted for my family stability. I wanted for my kids love and nurture. And so for me, it wasn't so much romantic relationships that I entered into that were dysfunctional. It was authority figures. It was my friendships. But to me, I was always like, oh, it's just probably this person. It's not me. But when I saw this pattern happen over and over and over again, then it was now my responsibility to acknowledge it. And it's just like this idea, right? Like if someone has hurt you, if you have been abused in your childhood, you are not responsible for what someone has done for you, but you are responsible to heal moving forward. And to do that, we often have to take responsibility for hard things, for subtle things that we tend not to like to take responsibility for.
Oh, that was so good. Just that last part specifically. Any other words for the person who's really just raw and maybe has so many barriers and defenses up that it's just terrifying to think about even, you know what I mean? It's like my life, I think I'm just better surviving rather than touching. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I was someone who put walls up. I was someone who would latch on to people and then put walls up, latch on to people and put walls up. And something that I have learned more about is attachment styles.
Yep.
Again, this is another thing going back to psychology, but it's just really, really interesting when we look at attachment styles. And I would encourage anybody listening to this to just go and read the different ones and say, which one could I possibly identify with here? For me, I identified with anxious attachment style. And what I learned through that, like ultimately we want to get to what's called a secure attachment. And not just a secure attachment with people, but a secure attachment with God. And when we continually see people as unsafe and we continually build walls up with people that are unsafe, we will do the same thing with God. Oftentimes the relationships that we have on earth reflect the relationships we have, the relationship we have with God, and vice versa. The relationship we have
Yes.
with God
Yes.
reflects the relationships that we have on earth. And so I think it's just so important that we have to look to God, and we have, even though people may be unsafe, even though people may have very well hurt us, we have to look at God and see him for who he truly is. And that is a father who is loving, who has open arms, who wants to welcome you in, who is safe. I repeat this over myself all the time. There are people who kicked me out. There were people who didn't want me, but there was a God who welcomed me into a kingdom. There were people who didn't want to call me theirs, but there is a God that says, you are mine, and his opinion of you trumps every other opinion.
Okay, so let's say we see a pattern and we're starting to say, okay, how do we actually find freedom? Like, how can we break free? And I just want to highlight, we probably have 40 some thousand men and women in prison who will hear these words. And so whether you're in prison or outside of prison, like, it feels like it's too late for me though, Adam. Like, I'm already here. So you guys are not in prison and where I'm at. Regardless of who's listening, like, how can I, if I want to break free from these patterns, like, where do I even start? And is it like, honest question, is it too late for me to start?
Yeah. So when I was 12 years old, I was in a juvenile detention center, and I think there was a ministry maybe that dropped off Bibles or something. There was a Bible in my jail cell. And when you do something bad, when you have a consequence in juvie, what they do is, so we get library books, but when you do something you're not supposed to do, you get the library books taken out. And then you get your mattress taken out, which the mattress is really like a thin gymnastics mat. It's not really a mattress. So the guards, they do roll call. And when they say roll call, you're supposed to stand up, and then they make sure that everyone's in their cell. They count them. And so they did a roll call, and I didn't stand up. I think I was sleeping. I don't know. I just didn't hear it. But I got my mattress and my library books taken out. But they cannot take your Bible out because it's like a religious freedom or something. And so I had my Bible, and I started it was the only thing I had to do in there. I hadn't picked up a Bible or read a Bible before this, but I was leafing through my Bible, and I was in Colossians, and I read that Paul was in jail. And I thought, Paul's in jail, I'm in jail. Must be doing something right. Okay, but actually, we had these vents in between our cells. And so I started reading my Bible to the other girls. And then when my consequence was over, I did not come to Christ at this point. I was not saved. I did not know my identity in Christ. I didn't know who he was, but I did find the word of God inspiring and encouraging. And I wanted to share it with people.
Whoa.
And then when we went out of our cells, we had like group time. And I was telling the girls, like, this is what I read. Like, isn't this so cool? And what I have experienced in my life when I was 12 and now is that freedom is found in doing what God has called you to do. And that is sharing the gifts that God has given by telling people about who he is. That is where I have found freedom, because when people have spoken over me, that I would go back to juvie, but when people have spoken over me these statistics, walking out my God-given calling has contradicted all of those lies. And I see God continually show up again and again. And you can do that in prison. You can walk out your God-given calling in prison, and you can do that outside of prison.
So good. Other ways to begin breaking those patterns. Anything else that you'd say, like one or two practical things like to break through?
Yeah, wise counsel. I think not growing up in a Christian home and in the faith, I I was in a very healthy, strong church, and I had mentors and ministers speaking over me.
That's good.
And I really needed that when I came to the Lord, because like I just didn't have any background of how to be a disciple or how to follow Jesus. And so, I would get really defensive, and I didn't want to hear some of the things that they were saying. But when I would actually think about it and apply it, it always helped me and served me. And so I think, view people who are giving you criticism and feedback not as people who are calling you out, but people who are calling you up.
That's good.
And I can't emphasize enough that, walk out the calling that God has put on your life. And, when I say calling, I do not mean like something very specific. Like your vocation is love. Your vocation, your calling is to love as Christ loves. And that can be literally done anywhere at any point. And I think when we do that, when we love our neighbor, when we love the people in front of us, we just find who we are meant to be in Christ and who God has called us to be. When I was 17, my church gave me my first speaking engagement. They asked me to raise awareness for foster care on what we refer to here as a Belong Sunday. Some churches call it Orphan Sunday. And I'm 29 now, so I have been in ministry in some capacity for 12 years. And throughout the whole time, I have heard people tell me, I am too young, I am not ready, I am not healed enough. And I look back and I'm like, you are absolutely right. I have been unready. I have been unhealed.
Tell me something I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. And it was about 4 years later, after I shared my testimony for the first time, there was this woman who reached out to me on social media, and she said, I just wanted to let you know that I heard you share your testimony at this time. And now today, me and my husband got involved in foster care right away after we heard you share your testimony. And today we are adopting a sibling group of 3. And very well, I will say a million times, I was not ready. But God made the people who heard the message ready. God may have not yet prepared me, but he filled the gaps of my inadequacies, and he prepared the people to hear it. And so for me, when it comes to breaking the patterns, it starts with just breaking through those lies spoken over you, or those lies that even you have spoken over yourself, and walking in who God says you are.
That was incredible. What about the person who's like, I've tried, but my family is so broken and I'm so broken. I just feel like I'm just kind of at the end of I just feel like I've tried and it's just, I've tried. What would you say to that person?
Yeah. I remember when I was younger, I would always be like, I can't wait to be an adult. And the adults in my life would be like, oh, it only gets harder. And guess what? It actually hasn't gotten harder than foster care, to be honest. Life is hard, no doubt. But I'm glad that I'm an adult. I'm glad that I'm not still a kid. And so I say that because I think that there are many choices that I had to make to get to where I am. And it is by the grace of God that I am where I am as well. But I do think that through the choices you make, and if you can just hold fast to the Lord, it truly does get better.
So good.
There is hope for the future. And I know that's so simple, but it is just a simple faithfulness, a gritty faithfulness.
It's great.
That gets us to the end.
Because it would have been so easy to give up.
Yes. And it would be so easy to give up now. There are days where I'm like, this ministry thing is hard. Why did I choose this? This is a hard one. But it's a gritty kind of faithfulness. And it's, do not grow weary of doing good, for in due time, we will reap a harvest. And it's that in due time that we have to, it's not the harvest part that we need to remember. It's that in due time, and we don't know what that due time is, but the promise is in that.
That's so good. That might preach, by the way. If you've probably preached on it before, if you haven't, lean into that. Last question. What is something, totally switching gears for the last question, what is something that you've recently learned that has helped you make a difference with your life? When it comes to impact, when it comes to touching lives, is there anything that God has like taught you lately of when it comes to having impact?
Yeah. Gonna go back to that idea of like, you're not ready. If another kind of like thing I've heard with young people getting into ministry or young people serving is just that you shouldn't serve until you're healed. Like you really shouldn't show up until you're healed. And I started showing up way before I was healed. And like healing is non-linear and it's ongoing. Like I'm still healing, still figuring it out. And what I have noticed is I get to serve kids and young people who are growing up like I did. And what they give me is like this window. So I get to look into their life, like I get to see through their life, but also if I step back, I see a reflection of myself.
Ooh.
And what that has given me and shown me is just a much clearer perspective of my past. It's given me more compassion for the people that served me. It's given me more love for maybe the people that I thought failed me, but really they were doing their absolute best. And so I would say, serve the vulnerable, serve the poor, and serve people who have similar struggles to you, because I think it just gives us a much broader and clearer perspective of what we've been through and what service and what love truly is.
Well, friends, I hope that conversation and some of Tori's words connected with you in a big, big way. If you know of someone that would benefit from that conversation, please share it with them. Send it in a text message, email it to a friend, share it with them. Tori, thank you so much for our time today. I was so grateful for that. Thanks to our partners, Vern Eide Motorcars and Mission Haiti, two amazing organizations who helped make this episode possible. And lastly, but not leastly, thanks to all of you who listened to the conversation. I don't take it lightly. I'm so grateful. God bless.